Hey Kiss Army. And honestly, anyone who has ever wondered what really happens behind the curtain when a legendary band becomes a multi-million-dollar business. Tonight, we're going to slow things down and talk about something fans have debated for decades. The money, not just the guitars and the makeup, the contracts, the ownership, the buyouts, the tours, the royalties. Because when people talk about Kiss, they usually focus on the spectacle, the fire, the explosions, the larger-than-life characters. But behind all that was something just as powerful, a business empire. And like most empires, it wasn't always easy to keep everyone happy once the money started flowing. So tonight, we're going to walk through the real financial story behind the departures of Ace Frehley and Peter Criss. No conspiracy theories, no fan mythology. Just what the people involved have said in interviews, memoirs, and what the industry numbers show about the band's earnings and deals over the years. And by the end of this, you'll understand something important about Kiss. They weren't just a band, they were one of the most successful rock businesses ever created. Let's start at the beginning. New York City, 1973. Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley, Ace Frehley, and Peter Criss come together to form a band that very quickly becomes something bigger than music. Right from the start, the idea was different. Instead of just being musicians, they created characters. The Demon, the Star Child, the Spaceman, the Catman. Each one looked like something out of a comic book, and that was intentional, because Gene Simmons in particular understood something early that most bands didn't think about. If fans loved the characters, they would want to take those characters home with them. That meant merchandise. And by the mid-1970s, Kiss merchandise was everywhere. Lunchboxes, action figures, posters, comic books, Halloween costumes, pinball machines. It was an explosion of branding that very few rock bands had ever attempted before. By the late 70s, Kiss had already sold millions of records worldwide, and the merchandise business was generating massive additional revenue. In other words, this wasn't just a rock band anymore, it was a company. And in a company, ownership matters. During the 1970s, the four members of Kiss were generally treated as partners in the band's business structure. That meant the profits, touring, records, merchandise, were tied to the band's corporate agreements. And during the peak years of the late 70s, those numbers were enormous. The 1979 Dynasty Tour, for example, was a major commercial success. Arena shows across North America drew huge crowds, and Kiss continued to sell albums at a massive scale. But inside the band, relationships were getting strained. Not musically, financially. Creative disagreements, personal struggles, and different visions for the future of the band. Eventually, those tensions led to the first major departure, Peter Criss. Peter Criss stopped performing regularly with Kiss in 1980. But what many fans don't realize is that leaving the stage did not immediately mean leaving the business. For several years after stepping away from the lineup, Peter remained financially tied to the band's corporate structure. That meant he still received money connected to earlier recordings and business agreements. But eventually, those business ties ended. A date that appears repeatedly in Kiss band histories is February 3rd, 1987. That's the point when Peter Criss finalized the transfer of his remaining stake in the band's corporate entity. It also included the transfer of the rights connected to the Catman character. Years later, Paul Stanley talked about that moment in interviews and reflected on it in a way that many fans found revealing. He said the makeup rights were sold for not a whole lot. And when you think about the timing, that makes sense. By the mid-1980s, the original Kiss makeup era looked like something from the past. The band had moved on. Music trends had changed. And nobody knew that decades later, the original characters would become incredibly valuable again. At the time, it probably felt like closing a chapter, but financially, it meant something very important. Ownership of the original Kiss characters was now consolidated under Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley. Now let's move to the second major departure, Ace Frehley. For many fans, Ace was the musical heart of Kiss. His guitar style had a bluesy feel that balanced the theatrical side of the band. But by the early 1980s, Ace was struggling personally and creatively. And eventually he decided to leave the band. Ace has always insisted on one point very clearly. He says he was not fired. He says he chose to leave. In interviews and speaking engagements over the years, Ace has described the moment he realised he needed to walk away. According to his recollection, the band had been negotiating a major recording and touring contract worth roughly $15 million. It was a huge deal. But Ace has said that when he looked at the situation honestly, he realised something. He wasn't happy. And he didn't believe the lifestyle was sustainable for him. One story he's told more than once involves sitting in his lawyer's office and finally saying something simple. You can't spend money if you're not alive to enjoy it. So he stepped away. Now here's the key point about the financial side. Unlike many rock band breakups that end up in public lawsuits, the exact details of Ace Frehley's financial settlement were never fully disclosed publicly. There is no confirmed court document that lists a specific buyout number. Ace has mentioned receiving a financial settlement at the time, but the precise amount has remained private. What we do know is that Ace continued to earn income tied to his songwriting credits and recordings from the years he was in the band. Songs like Cold Gin, Shock Me New York Groove. Those credits matter because in the music industry, songwriting royalties can continue for decades. After the departures of Ace and Peter, Kiss entered a completely new phase. In 1983, the band famously removed the makeup. It was a huge gamble. But surprisingly, the move worked. Albums like Lick It Up, Animalize Asylum helped introduce Kiss to a new generation of fans. Financially, the band stabilized. They continued touring. They continued selling records. And the business machine kept moving forward. Meanwhile, Ace Frehley and Peter Criss pursued their own solo careers. Some projects did well, some didn't. But the one thing that never disappeared was the demand from fans to see the original four together again. Then came 1996, one of the most dramatic reunions in rock history. April the 16th, 1996. A press conference aboard the USS Intrepid in New York Harbor, hosted by Conan O'Brien. When the curtain lifted and the original lineup appeared in full makeup for the first time in nearly 2 decades, the place exploded. Fans had waited years for that moment, and the business side of the music industry immediately understood something. This was going to be huge. That reunion led directly to the Alive/Worldwide tour. According to trade reporting at the time, the tour became the top-grossing tour of 1996. The numbers were impressive. About $43.6 million earned from 92 shows in 75 cities. More than 1.2 million tickets sold. And that was just the first phase. The tour continued into 1997 and eventually reached roughly 192 shows worldwide. The reunion became one of the most successful rock tours of the decade. Which brings us back to the money. Here's where things were different from the 1970s. Ace Frehley and Peter Criss did not return as equal corporate partners. They returned under performance contracts. That meant they were paid to perform in the band rather than sharing ownership of the entire Kiss business operation. According to multiple interviews from the musicians themselves, they still earned millions of dollars during the reunion era. The tour was extremely successful, but the structure of the deal meant that Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley maintained control over the broader Kiss business. That included merchandising, brand licensing, and long-term intellectual property rights. Ace and Peter have both said in interviews that while they were grateful for the opportunity and the money they earned during the reunion, they sometimes felt more like employees than owners. And that tension eventually resurfaced. In 2000, Kiss launched what was announced as the Farewell Tour. Once again, the original lineup started the tour together, and once again, the shows were a huge draw. Fans wanted to see the original characters together on stage, but the business relationships inside the band were still complicated. By the time the tour reached its later stages, the lineup had changed again, and the era of the original four performing together regularly was effectively over. Fast forward to 2024, more than 50 years after the band first formed. Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley made one of the biggest financial decisions in the band's history. They sold the Kiss catalogue, brand, image, and intellectual property to the Swedish entertainment company Pophouse Entertainment. Major outlets including Bloomberg, Variety, and the Associated Press reported the deal at around or above $300 million. The company behind the purchase had already been involved in projects like the ABBA Voyage digital concert experience. Their plan with Kiss is to expand the brand through technology and future entertainment productions. For Simmons and Stanley, the deal was a massive financial milestone. For Ace Frehley and Peter Criss, who had transferred their ownership stakes years earlier, the sale did not include them financially. However, they continue to receive income tied to recordings and songwriting credits from their years with the band. So what does the financial story of Kiss really tell us? It tells us that building a legendary rock band is only half the story. The other half is ownership, contracts, business decisions, and sometimes difficult choices. Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley believe they carried the band through its hardest years and earned the right to control the brand. Ace Frehley and Peter Criss believe their early creativity helped build the foundation that made the band successful in the first place. Both perspectives exist. Both have truth in them. But for fans, the most important part of the story never changed. The music, the memories, and the feeling when those four characters walked onto a stage together. Because once the opening chords of Rock and Roll All Night start playing, none of the contracts matter anymore. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think Ace and Peter should have remained equal partners in the band? Would you have walked away from a massive contract like Ace did? And what do you think about the Kiss brand now belonging to a company that plans to keep the characters alive for future generations? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want more deep dives into the real history of Kiss, the business deals, the albums, the stories behind the tours, let me know. Thanks for spending this time with me. Stay loud, stay proud. And remember, rock and roll is supposed to be fun, even when the money gets complicated. Rock on.